What would you do if the sky above you suddenly cracked open? Not a storm, not an eclipse, not the end of the world. The sky itself? Breaking apart. Mountains collapsed. The earth split open. Floodwaters swallowed everything in their path. Wildfires burned without end. Beasts hunted humans. The world wasn't dying, it was coming undone. Most myths begin with creation. A god creates the world. Light defeats darkness. Order rises from chaos. But ancient China imagined something far stranger. It imagined a world that had already been created, a world that had already been beautiful, a world that suddenly broke. And once everything fell apart, the question was no longer, who created the world? It became, who could save it? Thousands of years ago, ancient China answered that question with the story of one goddess, not a warrior, not a queen, not a conqueror, a repairer. Her name was Nuwa. Today people simply say she repaired the sky. But that sentence barely scratches the surface, because Nuwa wasn't fixing a hole. She wasn't repairing a roof. She was trying to restore an entire universe that had fallen into chaos. In the oldest complete version of the myth, the 4 pillars of heaven have collapsed. The land has split apart. Fire refuses to die. Floodwaters refuse to retreat. The sky can no longer protect the earth. The earth can no longer support life. Humanity stands on the edge of extinction. Then, Nuwa steps forward, not carrying a sword, not leading an army, but carrying 5 colored stones. She melts them together, raises them toward the broken sky, and begins one of the most extraordinary acts in all of mythology. But perhaps the real mystery isn't how she repaired the sky. The real mystery is why ancient China imagined a goddess who chose to repair the world instead of creating a new one. Because almost every civilization tells stories about how the world begins. Very few ask what happens after the world breaks. And maybe that has always been the real question behind the legend of Nuwa. When the world around you falls apart, do you walk away? Or do you choose to repair what remains? If you've heard this story before, there's a good chance you've never actually heard the original version. Most people believe the legend comes from the classic of mountains and seas. It doesn't. At least, not the version most people know today. The earliest surviving reference to Nuwa appears even earlier, not as the goddess who repaired the sky, but as a mystery. An ancient poem simply asks, who created Nuwa herself? It never answers. It leaves the question hanging. Later, another ancient text mentions Nuwa again, but something is still missing. There is no broken sky, no 5 colored stones, no giant turtle, no black dragon, only strange fragments, pieces of a much older mythology. Then, around 2,000 years ago, everything changed. A book called the Huainenzi finally tells the story in full, not as a fairy tale, not as a children's story, but as a cosmic disaster. The 4 pillars of heaven collapse. The earth tears apart. Fire burns without end. Floodwaters swallow the world. Wild beasts hunt humans. Birds carry away the weak. The universe itself is falling apart, and only then does Nuwa appear, not to create the world, but to save one that is already broken. That difference changes everything, because this isn't really a creation myth, it's a repair myth. And very few civilizations ever imagined one. But if repairing the sky was all Nuwa did, why has this story survived for more than 2,000 years? Because the repair itself is unlike anything else in mythology. Nuwa doesn't pray. She doesn't cast a spell. She doesn't command the heavens. She works. She searches the world, collecting 5 extraordinary stones, each one a different color. Then she melts them together, not into a weapon, not into a crown, but into something capable of healing the sky itself. Yet the stones alone aren't enough. The ancient text describes a world so badly damaged that everything must be repaired. She cuts off the legs of a giant turtle and raises the 4 pillars of the world once again. She slays a black dragon and bringing peace back to the land. She burns reeds into ash, using them to stop the endless flood. Stone, fire, earth, water, animal, almost every part of nature becomes part of the repair. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is separate. That may sound strange today, but to ancient China, the universe wasn't a machine. It was a living balance. When one part failed, everything else suffered. And restoring the world didn't mean replacing it. It meant bringing every piece back into harmony. That's why the 5 colored stones matter. They weren't chosen because they were beautiful. They represented something much deeper. A broken world cannot be repaired with only one thing. It takes balance. It takes every part working together. And perhaps that idea feels more relevant today than ever before. For thousands of years, people have remembered Nuwa as the goddess who repaired the sky. But perhaps that was never the real miracle. The miracle wasn't that she fixed heaven. The miracle was that she believed a broken world was still worth saving. Think about how most myths end. A hero defeats the monster. A god wins the war. Good triumphs over evil. Order is restored through victory. But Nuwa doesn't defeat the sky. She doesn't conquer chaos. She doesn't build a new world. She saves the one that already exists. That is a very different idea. Because repairing something is often harder than replacing it. Anyone can destroy. Many dream of starting over. Very few choose to stay and rebuild what has been broken. Perhaps that's why this myth has survived for more than 2,000 years. Not because people believe the sky was literally repaired, but because everyone has lived through a world that suddenly fell apart. The loss of someone they loved. A dream that quietly disappeared. A family that could never be the same again. A future they thought was certain, until it wasn't. At some point, everyone discovers that the world they imagined no longer exists. And in that moment, we all face the same choice. Walk away or begin repairing, one small piece at a time. Maybe that's what the 5 colored stones were always meant to represent. Not magic, not power, but the simple belief that even the most broken world can become whole again. Nuwa never taught us how to create a perfect world. She taught us something far more difficult, how to love an imperfect one, enough to repair it. And perhaps that is why the legend has never disappeared. Because every generation eventually inherits a broken world. The question is no longer whether the sky can break. The question is, when it does, what will you choose to repair?